I think we've all been looking at the horrible pictures of these fires all week. Some of them, to me, almost looked like Hollywood created them. You know, a set with the flames. It looked so perfect, except that it was real. No movie set, tragically. I'm on a WhatsApp chat group with the rabbinic fellows from B'nai Jeshurun, all of us, 25 of us who over the years have gone through the fellowship, many of us very close friends, and certainly colleagues who've supported each other. And there was a message early on in the fires asking if the two LA rabbis were okay. Rabbi Levine Grader wrote back and said, "I'm okay, I'm in Pasadena, but Rabbi Frimmer's closer over in West LA." And then later in the day, he wrote back and said, "I ran in and got the Torahs. I think the synagogue is going to go up in flames." He went back into the synagogue before the fire had moved over. He lived only a few blocks away and went in to rescue, I can't remember if it was 13 or 14 Torahs that were in two different arcs in the building. He was the rabbi there, along with Cantor Ruth Berman Harris, the clergy team, and some other rabbis. You may remember Larry Harris, who was the city director when I was in the Shereth Israel Temple Youth Program. He was my first grade Judaic studies teacher at Brandeis. And his wife is Cantor Berman Harris, who works there in the Pasadena Jewish community. She also came and picked up the Torahs, and the Torahs are now in a congregant's home that is a little bit farther outside of Pasadena. When I talked to Josh, he said to me, "I stayed in the building with ash falling on us from the nearby fire that had suddenly broken out." And he said, "I stood there with the Torahs until the electricity went off. And when the electricity went off and the ash became so heavy, we had to leave, but I left the Torahs there knowing that Cantor Harris would pick them up shortly and give them to a congregant. So we got them all out. All of the Torahs came out of KI and the Palisades as well." He texted me from a friend's house in South Pasadena, and he said, "We've been evacuated, so we're spending the night at a friend's house. I'm exhausted, and I'm going to sleep." I hope he did, because I couldn't sleep. And in the middle of the night, I kept checking the New York Times. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the front page photograph was the Pasadena Jewish Center and Temple with its iconic front arches and flames shooting out everywhere. I don't know if you've seen that photo, but with the headline, "Many Jewish important Pasadena buildings were affected." That's one of the ones that many people have now seen. As far as they know, the entire synagogue is gone. And thankfully, the people and the Torahs were removed. While Josh and Francie slept at their friends in South Pasadena, their house a few blocks away caught fire. And in the morning when they woke up, their house was gone. 2 days later, when they were able to, they returned to see what was there. This is true, what I'm about to tell you. When they walked into the house, and I've seen the photos, there was just burned ashes, remnants of their former life, except for two things that didn't burn in the living room. One was Rabbi Kalanimus Shapira's book. He was the last great Hasidic rabbi killed in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was known by the name Eish Kodesh, Holy Fire. And his book of commentary on the Torah portions is called Sacred Fire, Torah from the Years of Fury. It's a collection of his writings from 1939 to 1942 in Poland. Sacred Fire. All the other books burned. That one is sitting there. I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen the photo. The other thing that didn't burn was a slightly tattered poster of President Obama and the word hope. Everything else in his living room was destroyed. I don't know what lessons, if any, will come from the fire, and I certainly don't have any easy answers, even from those two extraordinary things that survived in their living room. This week has been a reminder of the overwhelming unknown in which we live, of a world which can change in a matter of minutes, moments. I talked to Josh this morning. I was finally able to reach him, and I said, "How are you?" And he said, "How can you ask me that question?" I said, "Well, are you numb, or are you shaking, or are you terrified? How are you?" And he said, "I'm all of those things." And I said to him, we know how to survive without a building, we Jews, right? We did it in COVID. We were reminded that we are a community more important and strong than any building could be. We come together in ways wherever and however we are. We know how to survive. And I said, but that is an old lesson that we learned as we Jews have wandered without a home throughout the world. We know how to survive. And he said, well, that's right. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote in The Sabbath, in his famous book, The Sabbath, that Shabbat is a cathedral in time. It's what we build, what we've always built to honor God and to honor community. We create Shabbat, our great cathedral in time, every week. It's not about a physical space, though we know that coming back into our beautiful sanctuary was so meaningful and so moving after COVID, after being together and keeping a strong community together without being in the building for so long. And then on the WhatsApp chat group, people were talking, all these rabbis were talking about the Torah portion this week and about how to respond to Josh. And our friend, Rabbi Eric Solomon, wrote something that felt really meaningful as we were all reading it and commenting on it. He said, my favorite teaching about Hanukkah, about the miracle of Hanukkah, is not about the rebuilding of the temple, although that was a miracle, and is not about the fact that the light lasted for 8 nights, though that was a miracle too. But he said the 7 nights could have been a good enough miracle. But the rabbis of old taught that the real miracle of Hanukkah was the first night, was the willingness to look for oil in a place of complete destruction. Instead of saying, we're finished, this place is flattened and we're done, we looked for some way to light up a little tiny bit of the darkness so that a miracle could come out of that. That's hope. That's Jewish hope. This week's Torah portion is called Vayechi, which means he lives, and is about the death of Jacob. This happens throughout the Torah. We talk about people's lives, Chaye Sarah, when Sarah dies. Right? It's a little bit of an interesting and strange Jewish way of thinking about life and death and the lessons that live on. But Rabbi Felicia Saul reminded us that this parsha, in a way, is a borderline between the past and the future. And I look forward to talking about this in Torah study tomorrow morning, because this Torah portion is the very end of the book of Genesis. It's the very end of the story of how we got to be the 12 tribes. And immediately in the next Torah portion, we find ourselves in Egypt, where we will be for hundreds of years. The past and the future were right on the border. Not sure when Jacob dies, and we don't know what's going to happen next, if there will be a future or what the future looks like. But suddenly, the assumption that God will stay with us and that there's a future, comes to teach us that we will go on, not knowing what's going to happen at the end of Genesis. We have no idea what lies ahead, but we go on. And the Eish Kodesh, Rabbi Kalanimus Shapira, whose book survived the fire in Josh's living room, says about this very parsha, we don't know what lies ahead, but we know always that God is with us. It's a pretty extraordinary thing for a rabbi to have written in December of 1939 in Poland. He said that. We don't know what lies ahead. How more unknown could life have felt than in December 39 in Poland? And yet, looking towards what might lie ahead, Rabbi Shapira in our community then and our community now, of course, believed that in the future, there would be a future. In the hearts of the Jewish people has always burned a sacred fire, a belief in hope in the darkest of times. Hatikva. It is part of who we are. Shabbat Shalom.